Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Gunshine State, where we talk about firearms and firearms policy right here in the great state of Florida. So thank you so much for tuning in. Please take a moment, like and share the program so that your friends know where the conversation is taking place. Also, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, and follow us on Instagram. And especially in the case of YouTube and Facebook, make sure you hit the notification button. That way you get the notifications as soon as we go live. Also, remember, Florida Carry is Florida's premier Second Amendment civil rights advocacy group. Please take a moment and become a member if you are not. Just follow the join link in the description to this video and become a member today. All right, folks, we all know how difficult firearms law can be. I mean, it is a complete and utter mess trying to be in compliance with firearms law, even in a place like Florida. You can imagine what it's like in places like California or Hawaii, but I guarantee you it's still a difficult thing to do here in the state of Florida. So what Florida Carry is doing is we're working together with the Firearm Firm to put on a webinar for up to 1,000 individuals to participate in, where you can go and talk to the experts about firearms and firearms law and get some of your questions answered regarding firearms and firearms law in the state of Florida. To talk a little bit about the upcoming webinar, I've invited Mr. David Katz from the Firearm Firm to be on the show. David, welcome to the program.
Hey, Craig, thanks for having me.
Excellent, excellent. So do me a favor. Before we get started talking about Florida gun law and the upcoming webinar, tell us a little bit about the Firearm Firm.
Sure. Well, my partner and I started the firm probably close to 15 years ago now. And our entire practice is devoted almost entirely to defending the Second Amendment rights and self-defense cases of Florida citizens.
Excellent. Now, it's kind of interesting because there are not a lot of law firms out there that actually specialize specifically in firearms law. What's some of the differences in some of the work that you wind up doing as opposed to, say, people who handle other areas of penal code or criminal law?
Sure. Well, all day long, our attorneys actually answer questions for Florida citizens, who've called to ask gun questions. One of the things we take very seriously is keeping people out of trouble in the first place. We have a website at www.thefirearmfirm where you can actually ask a question, and for free, we will get back to you and answer your question within 2 business days. So we spend a lot of time with that. We all have a very thorough understanding and knowledge of the gun laws in Florida because we can focus on that. My partner and I also wrote the book, Florida Gun Law Armed and Educated, written for everybody so that they can read the laws themselves and to help them understand the laws. But we take that very seriously, educating people. We think that people who are gun owners really should be educated so that they stay out of trouble.
I know in California, where I'm from, I know how complicated gun laws are. I know that at the federal level, how complicated gun laws are. How complicated are firearms and firearms-related law? How difficult is that to for the average person to navigate in the state of Florida?
Well, so some of the things are fairly easy, and others are more difficult. It's easy when you can't carry on post office property. That sounds pretty easy, but then you have to realize that for post offices, that includes the parking lot. Whereas with many other businesses, if you're told you can't carry in the business, you can still carry in the parking lot. So there are little nuances that you have to know. I'll give you another example. We have a law called our parking lot law, which pretty much says that you can carry a firearm in your car in any parking lot, in the state, and that a business owner can't keep you from carrying in the parking lot. And that law's still on the books. So if you're just reading the statutes, you're going to think that you can carry in your car and a business owner can't tell you to, get lost. But in fact, that law was found unconstitutional. And so the only part of that law still in effect is that a business owner can't tell his employees or her employees that have a CWFL, which is a concealed weapon and firearm license, our concealed carry license, But employees who have a CWFL can keep a firearm in their car securely encased, whether the boss likes it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But the rest of that law is unconstitutional. And so if you're reading the statutes, you're going to think, oh, well, here's what the law says.
Mm.
If you don't know the case law, you're in trouble.
Well, it's funny because a lot of people don't realize that they think a lawyer is a lawyer is a lawyer, or a criminal lawyer is a criminal lawyer is a criminal lawyer. But law is a lot like medicine, where you have specialists and people specialize in certain parts of the law. Even worse, people tend to think that law enforcement are lawyers, and the fact is when you consider how big and broad the penal code is, expecting them to know every single part of the law is difficult. So you almost like wonder, how exactly do we navigate all of this? How does the average person navigate all of this and make sure that they stay in compliance, or at least, the very least, stay out of trouble?
No, absolutely. And, if we can talk about law enforcement in the state of Florida for just a second, up until 2017, in the police academy, they didn't have any training at all on firearms law. In 2017, for the first time, I think they added a 4-hour block on gun law in the academy. So now, in their entire training, law enforcement officers get 4 hours on gun law. My partner and I actually have set up, we offered to travel to any law enforcement department in the state and put on a seminar for free for their officers on our dime. So that offer is still out there if any other departments want to take advantage of it. And we are actually working on online courses for the officers to do at their own pace, which will also be available for free for all law enforcement in Florida when it's done.
Okay, so now that leads me into a little bit about the webinar that you guys have coming up. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. As I mentioned, one of the cornerstones of our firm's beliefs and our mission is to educate gun owners. And my partner James and I are both life members of Florida Carry, and we are thrilled to be able to put on a gun law seminar for the members of Florida Carry. It's going to be a free, I called it a seminar, it's going to be a webinar. It will be done live, though. People can type in questions and we will answer them live. And we're going to do a 2-hour webinar and cover as much of the gun laws as we can. We're going to touch on civil aspects of firearm ownership and all the important areas of self-defense that every gun owner needs to know. We're going to talk to people about how to react if they are forced to defend themselves, what to do when the police arrive, and we are going to talk about the law as it is. Unfortunately, we often are faced with people who want to talk about the law being the way they want it to be, and I'll just give you an example. I believe in constitutional carry. I believe that the Second Amendment is the only carry permit I need. But that isn't the law. And that belief will get me arrested in Florida if I am concealed carrying. So we're going to focus on what the law actually says and requires instead of what we believe it should say. And sometimes that leads to conflict with some people who want the law to be the way they want it to be, but it just isn't. And so our advice is going to be based on the law as it's written.
And there's a way to get the law to be the way you want it to be, and that's called elections. That's called lobbying your elected officials, and that's called fighting in court. All of which are things that Florida Carry does. What a coincidence!
Right. Yeah, and actually, I'm proud that my law firm is involved in 2 of the Florida Carry lawsuits. I'm lead counsel on one of them.
Well, and that's the thing that people have to understand is that this fight takes place in multiple areas, and it's because of individuals like yourself and firms like yours that actually step up to the plate and are a part of this fight that we're able to do what we're able to be successful fighting for our rights in the courts, but also it really helps if we're actually doing a lot to make sure that the laws that are being put in place in the very first place respect our Second Amendment rights. And then even go a step further back from that, how about we elect people to office who believe in the fundamental right to keep and bear arms? That way, that way, instead of going to anti-gunners and ask them to do pro-gun stuff, you can actually go to pro-gun people and get them to support our rights.
Yeah, I mean, elections are ultimately extremely important. I'm not sure. I'm sure you're aware, but maybe some of the people who are watching aren't. Recently, the United States Supreme Court denied what we call cert or certiorari on every single gun law case in front of them currently, which means they're not going to hear it. They've let gun owners down all across the country. There's conflict in laws. We were hoping, I think there were 11 cases that involved gun rights before the Supreme Court, which they could have heard one or all of, and they've decided not to hear any of them. So we're going to be left in this quagmire of different states having different laws and different interpretations of what the Second Amendment says for at least the foreseeable future. And a couple of the justices were very critical of the rest for not taking on a Second Amendment case.
Well, let me ask you, because I mean, we've seen some pretty absurd rulings coming out of the Supreme Court. People have speculated that even though, because there I think we have four solid pro Second Amendment justices, and and four is all it really takes in order to get a case heard. I'm guessing that those four have not asked to have these cases heard because they don't trust Chief Justice Roberts. I'm just on the Second Amendment. I've heard that be speculated. What do you think about that?
Well, Chief Justice Roberts has had some surprise opinions, let me say. That when he was put on the court, I think nobody would have seen those opinions coming. I know that Kavanaugh and Thomas were both very critical of the rest of the justices, for not electing to hear any of those cases.
I believe, and this is once again, this is my personal perspective. I'm not going to say this is perspective necessarily Florida carry. I happen to believe that Justice Roberts, or Chief Justice Roberts, as he has made rulings, I'm beginning to believe he goes out of his way to defer to the state or to the government on laws. No matter which way it is, he seems to have this in my opinion, inappropriate respect for the legislative and the executive, and it even seems to supersede the Constitution. And once again, that's the way I see it. And I think that in these cases, I think if the right case were to come forward, one where it is a pro-gun law and it's being challenged, I think that those would be an example of a case where we might actually have a better chance with the Chief Justice. Any thoughts on that?
Well, just that, especially the Chief Justice, but the Supreme Court itself has to kind of walk a tightrope because unfortunately they don't have enforcement mechanisms of their own. They rely on the executive branch to enforce their rulings. And I believe that President Obama at one point said, that the Supreme Court was irrelevant in his mind and that he wasn't going to enforce a ruling if it came out against him. And, the Supreme Court doesn't have their own police or their own, army to go and make the other branches of the government do what they say. And in this country, the other branches of the government have always deferred to that third equal branch of government. Mm-hmm. But there have been a couple of times where, the situation has gotten really dicey for the Supreme Court. And I think that chief justices in particular try and keep their courts out of situations where they may become insignificant because the other branches are not following their rulings.
And we've seen time and time again, it seems to me that politicians are basically just saying they're flat out ignoring Heller, and it seems like even some of the lower courts are flat out ignoring Heller. And the fact that the Supreme Court isn't taking up any of these cases doesn't make anything any easier for gun owners, in particular those who reside in some of the more anti-gun or anti-Second Amendment circuits.
No, it actually makes it much more difficult, and it makes it much more likely that these politicians, especially in some of the more liberal states, are going to continue what they're doing fearlessly. Because if the Supreme Court isn't going to hear it, nothing's going to change.
Exactly.
They can get away with it.
Exactly. Do me a favor. Can you just share with us just a little bit more? Where can folks get more information about the webinar that's going to be coming up, and how can they sign up?
Sure. Well, there's going to be Facebook advertising. It hasn't gone out yet, but it's going to be started soon. They're also going to receive a direct email from Florida Carry. There will be a link in that email and on all the advertising, which they'll click on to register for the webinar. And it's free, 100% free. And we hope to see lots of people there. There's only room for 1,000 people, and Florida Carry has, tens of thousands of members. So when you see it, register early.
Excellent. Folks, like you said, this is a very good idea. If you are not on our mailing list already, guess what? You need to get on our mailing list, floridacarry.org. Go there, get on the mailing list, and that way you'll make sure that you get an invite to be a part of this webinar. Folks, I've seen it on social media. Y'all are always asking us questions. Well, guess what? Here's a chance to ask an expert questions to get the information that you need. So once again, go to floridacarry.org. Sign up for our email list, and we'll make sure that you guys are a part.
And the great thing about this webinar, Craig, is it's not going to be just me. It's going to be myself, my partner, James Phillips, and Eric Friday, corporate counsel for Florida Carry, will also be participating. So you'll be able to ask all of us questions, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Excellent. Now, how do folks follow you and the Firearm Firm and the work that you do? How do they reach you if they need you?
Sure. Well, the easiest way is through our website, thefirearmfirm.com. Like I said, you can enter questions there. We'll answer it. Of course, our phone number is on the website, and we're always happy to talk to people. You can call us at 321-332-6864.
Excellent. Sir, thank you so very much for coming on the program. Look forward to having you on again.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. David Katz of the Firearm Firm. Well, that's going to be it for this episode of the Gunshine State. We very much appreciate you tuning in. We appreciate you liking and sharing the program, telling your friends about Florida Carry. Become a member today and join in the fight for our civil rights. Remember, got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.